Okay, I thought this would be a good way to start off this channel, which I made like 4 months ago now and avoided actually uploading anything on. So I'm going to start with something simple, the respiratory tract, I guess, the respiratory system. And I'm going to be going over the pretty basic aspects of how the respiratory system works and how we breathe air. Um, so, yeah. So when most people think about how we breathe, the average person who doesn't really know in detail how it works, they think of, I guess, the air going in and know it goes down some tube and it ends up in the lungs. Sorry. And people know that the lungs are a big aspect of how they work. But that's kind of the extent to which most people's knowledge ends. So it gets really cool. Basically, it starts out like normal. Obviously, you breathe in through your mouth or nose, doesn't matter. They connect to the same tube, which then goes down into your lungs. Not deep. The tube that connects into the wings to the lungs kind of ends around slightly under your shoulder length, so it's actually a lot closer than you'd think. But I'll get to the point here. So it starts in the tube called the trachea, which starts basically your mouth. You have your all your anatomy there in the mouth. You have your, glottis, epiglottis, whatever. Uh, it passes through there, and that's I can gonna cover that in a different video, but that's not really relevant. So it goes down through the trachea, this tube that leads directly and only into the entrance of the lungs. So it goes down until about a bit under shoulder length, and then it splits into your two lungs. Important to note there you have two lungs, not one. Two main big lobes, left and right. So it splits into the two lungs with these tubes called the bronchus, which are two little tubes that connect to the left and right. And yeah, it's not that important. It goes through there. Some people know this, they just don't know it's called the bronchus. But here's where it gets interesting when it actually enters your lungs. That's where people's knowledge ends. So it'll go into your lungs, and the second it goes through those bronchuses that lead into the entrance of your lungs, that's where the cool stuff happens. The oxygen, the O2, will go in and it'll immediately travel. You can imagine it like a tree with smaller and smaller branches. It just branches off and off and off and off, getting smaller and smaller, these little tubes. So it started with your mouth, it got to this big trachea that goes down, it went to the smaller bronchus, and now it's in the smaller and smaller tubes. These tubes branch out all throughout the pulmonary tissue, all throughout your lungs, and they kind of branch out to all sides. And so the oxygen that you just breathed in will kind of go inside those tubes and it'll keep going into all the tissue in every corner of your lung. And then you're probably asking, these tubes, they're just tubes. They don't connect to your cells. How does oxygen get from these tubes in your lungs to your cells? So here's the really cool part. Eventually these tubes end, and they end in these kind of, super small areas. It goes forward a bit, and then there's little bulbs, and they're kind of the bulb shaped, kind of circular, like spherical shaped things, and these spheres are called alveoli, and they're little bubbles. You have millions and millions of them in your lungs. They're these little bubbles, and in these bubbles, the most important part of breathing happens. The oxygen, the O2, will enter from inside these little tubes. So up until now, it's just been in these tubes in your lungs. It'll now enter into your bloodstream, and it'll do this because every single one of these alveoli, these little spheres of bubble that end all these tubes, are surrounded by your bloodstream, by capillaries, and they surround every alveoli in your lung, hopefully, and the oxygen will diffuse into that. So if you don't know what blood diffusion is, I can link in the comments what exactly that is. But it's basically different particles transferring without a direct bloodstream connection. So it'll go from the alveoli into the bloodstream, and then it's in the bloodstream. So those capillaries connect to larger, uh, you know, They go through, connect back to the heart to be pumped through the body, through, well, I'll cover that in a different video, through the aorta to the whole body, and that's it. That's the connection there. So the most important part to note is that it enters the bloodstream through the alveoli, which is wrapped around capillaries. It'll transfer into the capillaries, and the capillaries will bring it all around the body. And then you might be wondering, then you breathe out. So what happens when you breathe out? Because you just breathed in this oxygen. So if all the oxygen you breathed in, or at least most of it, managed to go into your capillaries, then what are you breathing out? You're not breathing out nothing. You're breathing out carbon dioxide, CO2. So in the same way that the oxygen diffused into the capillaries, the millions of capillaries all throughout your lungs, the carbon dioxide will diffuse back into the capillaries, up the tube, up all the little the little bronchioles all throughout your lungs. It'll keep going up, just like the oxygen went down in the opposite direction. It'll meet up with the bronchus. It'll go up your trachea, and you exhale. All this inhale and exhale, blood transfusion, oxygen going through tubes happens in about 2 seconds. So, yeah, it's pretty fast, and you do it a lot per day. So that's how oxygen gets into your bloodstream, and then it carries out into cells, and I can also cover that in a separate video, how the oxygen actually gets to these cells and is accepted, and how exactly the oxygen, what the oxygen is carried in is what I can talk about now. So this oxygen now entered your capillaries, now it's in your bloodstream, but how is it carried around your body? The oxygen doesn't just float around on its own in your bloodstream. It needs to be carried by something. If it floated around randomly, it's literally air. It would just pop and dissolve, which is a different thing that's called an air embolism, but that's a whole different thing. It will go, this is how it happens, basically. If you're watching this video, I'm assume you know the extent that your blood is not main part, but big part of your blood is red blood cells, and these are flowing through the plasma in your blood. They're going everywhere, all throughout every single tube in your body. So on top of these red blood cells, like literally on top of the cell, so you can imagine very, very microscopic thing already, and then you're looking at on top of the cell, you have these little, you can imagine it as containers called hemoglobin. Now, you may have heard this term before, and you don't know exactly what it is. Basically, hemoglobin, here's a good analogy that I made. Your red blood cells are kind of like a cargo ship, and the hemoglobin is the boxes carried on the ship, meant to transport stuff. So the whole ship is the red blood cell, and that's its main purpose is to get around the body and just go places. And the containers itself carries the stuff inside of it. So the second that oxygen particle diffuses, it will attach onto a little container that will kind of seal it in a bubble, a hemoglobin bubble, so that it won't just pop and dissolve into the bloodstream. It'll encase it, and then now that oxygen is trapped inside this hemoglobin, or kind of around it, and it's on top of this red blood cell, this RBC, and multiply that by millions. That's how oxygen gets attached to red blood cells. The red blood cells are carried around the body, and then once the red blood cells get to the part of the body that oxygen wants to get off at, it'll just detach from the hemoglobin and diffuse into the cells. And again, that's a different thing. But yeah, that's basically how it's covered. Not much else to say. That's how the main start to understanding how the respiratory system works, how oxygen is carried throughout the body, and how it gets to that point, and how you breathe out, how oxygen and carbon dioxide is transfused through capillaries. And yeah, I just thought that would be a good way to start this channel with sort of a more simple video, simple and depending on what you know. But yeah, that's it. If anyone has any questions about any anatomical parts or anything that I wasn't clear, because I'm just everything I just said I thought of while speaking it, so it's not like I'm reading off a script. So I probably missed some important detail that I forgot. So just write your questions in the comments, and I will answer them to the best detail I can. And if anyone has anything thing they want to know that has nothing to do with this, like any part of the body, any anatomy, anything of the body, I can make a video on it and explain it. Just comment what you want to know, and I'll make a video explaining how it works in the body medically. So that's it.